It started as a routine assignment, the kind you don't question because nothing about it stands out. We were briefed just before dusk, standard recon patrol. No engagement expected, no known threats in the area. On paper, it was quiet. Too quiet, maybe. But that's not unusual for regions that haven't seen activity in a while. Still, there were small things that didn't sit right. The coordinates we were given had been updated twice in the last 24 hours. Not unusual on its own, but there was no explanation attached. Just revisions. Clean. Clinical. Like someone correcting a mistake they didn't want to acknowledge. Our commanding officer didn't elaborate either. He kept the briefing short. Almost deliberately so. Terrain overview. Movement route. Expected return window. No mention of prior patrols. No recent reports. Just blank space where there should have been something. I remember asking about that. Not directly. Just a casual question about previous activity in the sector. He paused for a second longer than he should have, then said, "Nothing recent." That was it. We geared up in silence after that. By the time we moved out, the sun was already low, the kind of light that flattens everything, shadows stretching longer than they should, colors draining into something dull and hard to read. Visibility was still good, but it felt like the day was already ending faster than it should. There were 5 of us. Standard formation. Nothing unusual in how we moved, how we communicated. It was all automatic. Years of training reduce everything to patterns. And that night, we followed them exactly. At first, the terrain didn't give us anything to think about. Ice dry ground, scattered vegetation, uneven but manageable. The kind of place where your attention drifts if you're not careful. No immediate threats, no movement, just distance. But even early on, something felt off. Not wrong in a way you could point to, just different. I noticed it when we crossed the first stretch of open ground. Our boots hit the dirt like they always do. But the sound didn't carry the same way. It was quieter than it should have been. Not muffled exactly, just contained. I didn't say anything. You don't call out something like that without a reason. Sound behaves differently depending on terrain. Everyone knows that. It wasn't enough to raise concern. Not yet. We kept moving. The map said we'd reach a shallow ridge within 40 minutes. We hit it in just over 30. That could have been our pace, maybe. Or maybe the terrain was easier than expected. Either way, no one commented on it. But I noticed. When we stopped briefly to check bearings, I took another look at the map, compared it to what I could see around us. The ridge was there. The elevation matched. But something about the spacing between landmarks felt slightly off. Like the distances weren't lining up the way they should. Again, nothing definitive. Just a feeling. We pushed forward. As the light dropped further, the environment started to flatten out visually. Depth became harder to judge. Shapes blended together. That's normal at dusk, but combined with everything else, it made the terrain feel less stable, like it wasn't fixed in place. At one point, I glanced back over our path. Standard habit, check your rear, confirm spacing, maintain awareness. Everything looked normal. 4 men behind me. Proper intervals. No sign of anything following us. Still, I held that look a second longer than usual. I don't know why. Maybe it was the silence. By then, it had become more noticeable. Not just the absence of wildlife, but the absence of anything reacting to us. No birds lifting, no insects shifting, nothing adjusting to our presence, just stillness. We reached the next checkpoint without incident, no visual anomalies, no contact, nothing that would justify concern in a report. But by that point, the routine feeling was gone, replaced by something quieter, something harder to define. And it wasn't coming from the terrain. It was coming from the way everything around us seemed unaffected by us being there. The silence didn't start all at once. It settled in gradually, like something easing into place without being noticed. At first, it just felt quieter than usual. No wind moving through the brush, no distant animal calls, even the subtle background noise you expect in open terrain. Gone. It wasn't something you register immediately. Your brain fills in the gaps, assumes everything is normal, but after a while, you start noticing what's missing. We continued along the planned route, spacing consistent, communication minimal. No one said anything. But I could tell the others were picking up on it too. You could see it in the way they moved, slightly more deliberate, heads turning a little more often than necessary. The ground under our boots was dry, compacted dirt with scattered patches of loose gravel. Every step should have produced a clear, sharp sound, but it didn't. It was softer, not muffled exactly, just reduced, like the sound wasn't traveling as far as it should. I tested it without drawing attention, shifted my weight harder on one step, enough to create a heavier impact. I heard it clearly, but it didn't carry forward, didn't echo, didn't bounce off anything. It just stopped. That was the first moment I felt it properly. Not fear, just awareness. I glanced to my left. One of the others, Khan, had slowed slightly, scanning the tree line even though there was nothing there. No movement, no reason to focus on it. He caught me looking and gave a small shake of his head. Not a signal, just acknowledgement. He felt it too. We kept moving. The terrain ahead was open, broken by low vegetation and shallow depressions in the ground. Visibility should have been an advantage. Nothing to hide behind, nothing to obscure movement. But the longer we walked, the less reassuring that felt. Because there was still nothing. No movement in the distance. No shifting shadows. Even the air felt still, like it had weight to it. At one point, our point man raised a hand and halted the formation. We stopped instantly. Everyone listened. That's when it stood out the most. Not a single sound. Not even the kind you normally ignore. No distant rustling. No faint background noise. Just complete absence. I became aware of my own breathing, controlled but louder than it should have been. The faint sound of fabric shifting as someone adjusted their stance. Small things. Too small. The halt lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then he lowered his hand and we moved again. No explanation, none needed. But the silence stayed with us. As the light continued to fade, my depth perception started slipping. Shadows stretched unevenly across the ground, blending into the terrain in ways that made it harder to judge distance. Shapes looked flatter, less defined. I found myself double-checking footing more often. That wasn't normal. You get used to terrain quickly. Your body adjusts. Movement becomes automatic. But here it felt like I had to think about each step more than I should, like the ground wasn't entirely predictable. We passed through a narrow stretch where the vegetation grew slightly denser. Not enough to block movement, but enough to break the line of sight between us for brief moments. That's when I noticed something else. The moment someone moved out of direct view, it felt longer than it should, even if it was just a second, a gap. Hard to explain. I kept my eyes forward after that. No one spoke. No one broke formation. But the rhythm of the patrol had changed. It was still controlled, still disciplined, but there was hesitation now. Subtle, but there. Like everyone was waiting for something to happen, even though nothing had. We reached another marker point on the map, a shallow dip in the terrain that should have led toward a slightly elevated path ahead. It was there, exactly where it should be, and yet, standing there, looking at it, I felt the same thing I'd been feeling since we started. Not that something was wrong, but that something wasn't lining up the way it should. I took a slow look around. The ground, the horizon, the men, everything was in place. Everything made sense, except for the silence. And the longer it stayed that way, the harder it became to ignore the thought that it wasn't natural. It was being held there. We didn't notice the footprints right away. That's the part that stayed with me the most. Not when we found them, but how long they had already been there before any of us said a word. It was Khan who stopped first. No signal, no warning. He just slowed. Then came to a complete halt in the middle of the path. The rest of us adjusted automatically, spacing tightening slightly as we followed his line of sight. At first, I thought he'd seen movement. There was nothing ahead, just the same dry ground, broken by shallow impressions and uneven patches of dirt. Then I saw it, footprints, clear, fresh, pressed into the ground directly along our path. For a second, it didn't register as anything unusual. Tracks aren't uncommon, even in low activity zones. Could have been another patrol, local movement, anything. But something about them felt too clean, too defined. I stepped forward slightly, lowering my gaze to get a better look. The impressions were sharp, edges still intact, no signs of erosion, no debris settled into them. Whoever made them had passed through recently. Very recently. That alone wasn't the problem. The problem was the direction. They were moving the same way we were. Ahead of us. Khan crouched down without saying anything. Gloved hand hovering just above one of the prints. He didn't touch it right away, just observed. The rest of us held position. I scanned the surrounding area again. Left, right, tree line, horizon. Still nothing. No movement, no sound, no indication of anyone nearby. "Recent," he said quietly. I nodded. It matched what I was seeing, but something about it didn't sit right. I took a step closer. That's when the spacing caught my attention. Each print was set at a consistent distance. Not unusual on its own, but familiar. The stride length, the angle of placement. It looked controlled, measured, disciplined, military. I felt that awareness again, the same one from earlier, but sharper now. I glanced back at our formation, then back at the ground. Something wasn't adding up. "Could be earlier patrol," our point man said. Calm, controlled. It sounded reasonable. It should have been enough. But no one moved, because we all knew something didn't fit. There was no mention, someone behind me said. Low voice, not challenging, just stating a fact. He was right. No recent activity. That's what we'd been told. I looked down again. This time, I focused on the details. The heel mark, the depth of the impression, the slight outward angle of the left step. It looked familiar in a way I couldn't immediately explain. Not just similar, recognizable. I shifted my weight unconsciously, my own boot pressing into the dirt beside the existing track. Then I froze. For a moment, I just stared. My print and the one ahead of it. Same size, same shape. I leaned forward slightly, narrowing my focus. There was a small wear mark near the outer edge of the sole. Subtle, but visible. I looked at my own boot again. Same mark. I didn't say anything right away. I wasn't sure. Could have been coincidence. Standard issue boots. Similar wear patterns. It happens. But it didn't feel like coincidence. Not with how precise it was. Khan noticed me staring and followed my line of sight. He didn't react immediately, just looked. Then his posture shifted. Slightly. Not panic. Recognition. He didn't say it either, but I knew he saw it. We stood there longer than we should have. No one speaking, no one moving forward, because the situation hadn't crossed into something explainable yet, but it was getting close, too close. Finally, our point man made the call. We move, simple, direct, no discussion. We resumed formation, stepping forward along the same path. And that's when it changed, because as I placed my foot down, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The footprint ahead of me was exactly where my next step was about to land. Not close, not approximate, exact. I hesitated for half a second, then stepped anyway. My boot fit perfectly into the impression. No adjustment needed, no variation, just alignment. I kept moving, one step, then another. Each time, the same thing. The prints ahead matched exactly where we were about to step. Not where we had stepped, where we were going to. I felt my focus narrow. Everything else faded slightly. The terrain, the formation, even the silence. All I could see were the footprints, leading forward, waiting. And for the first time since we started the patrol, I stopped thinking about who made them and started thinking about how they got there first. We didn't stop immediately after that. That's what training does. Even when something doesn't make sense, you keep moving. You follow the structure. Rely on procedure. Assume there's an explanation you just haven't reached yet. But the moment had already shifted. No one said it out loud, but we were all thinking the same thing now. Those footprints weren't just similar. They were matching us. Exactly. We moved another 20 meters before the point man raised his hand again. This time, the halt was sharper, immediate, no hesitation. Everyone froze in place. "Check," he said quietly. That was all. We understood. I stepped out of line slightly, just enough to get a clearer view of the tracks without overlapping them. The ground here was flatter, the impressions more visible. Khan moved up beside me. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. I crouched down, bringing my eyes level with the ground. The detail was clearer from this angle. Depth, pressure, shape. It all stood out more when you weren't looking straight down. I focused on one print in particular, the right boot. The heel was slightly deeper than the toe, suggesting a forward-leaning step. Normal, expected, but there was also a faint drag mark just behind it, like the foot had shifted slightly on impact. I knew that pattern. I leaned back just enough to glance at my own last step. Same depth, same angle, same drag. I didn't feel anything at first, just a quiet, controlled realization. Khan exhaled slowly beside me. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough to break the silence for a second. "Check yours," he said. I didn't respond, just nodded. I stood, stepped back, then deliberately placed my foot down beside one of the prints. Not inside it, next to it. Same size, same tread, same spacing. But that still wasn't enough, so I did something I normally wouldn't do unless necessary. I changed my step. Instead of walking naturally, I shortened my stride, slightly uneven, deliberate. Then I took another step. We all watched. The next footprint ahead matched it. Exactly. Same shortened distance. Its same angle. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not panic, something colder. I looked up. No one was pretending anymore. The point man stepped forward, repeating the same test. Altered stride, different angle, slight hesitation mid-step. And again, the footprint ahead adjusted perfectly. No delay, no error. It was immediate, like it already knew. "That's not possible," someone said behind me. Quiet, controlled, but it carried. No one corrected him, because there wasn't anything to correct. We were past coincidence now, past misinterpretation. This wasn't random. This was precise, deliberate. I scanned the ground further ahead. The prints continued in a straight line, consistent, evenly spaced, until they reached a patch of harder terrain where the impressions faded slightly. But even there, you could still see them, faint outlines, still matching, still leading. I shifted my attention to the edges of the path. Maybe there were other tracks we missed. Maybe something intersected with them. There was nothing, no overlapping movement, no signs of disturbance, just our path and those prints. The air felt heavier now, not physically, just present, like the space around us wasn't empty anymore. "Another patrol didn't do this," Khan said. It wasn't a question. "No," I replied. That was all I could say, because anything else would have meant trying to explain it, and I didn't have anything that fit. The point man remained still for a moment longer, then made a decision. "Maintain formation, stay alert. We continue." His voice was steady, controlled, but there was something underneath it now, not doubt, awareness. We fell back into position, but it wasn't the same as before. The rhythm was gone. Each step felt observed, measured. I found myself watching the ground more than the horizon, watching where the next footprint would appear. And every time, it was already there, waiting, perfectly placed, as if something had already walked the exact path we were about to take, step for step. Before we even decided to move, I tried to shift my focus away from it, scan the surroundings, check for movement, stay disciplined. But it didn't matter, because no matter where I looked, my attention kept pulling back to the same place, the ground ahead, and the quiet certainty that whatever was creating those prints wasn't following us. It was staying just far enough ahead to make sure we never caught up. We didn't say it out loud, but the objective changed right there. It wasn't about completing the patrol anymore. It was about understanding what we were looking at. The point man signaled a slight shift in formation. Not a full stop, not a break, just enough to give us space to test without disrupting control. It was subtle, something you wouldn't notice unless you were part of it. We adjusted automatically. "On me," he said quietly. Then he stepped off the path. That was the first deviation. Up until then, we had been following a straight, predictable line. The footprints had matched that perfectly, but now he angled right, cutting across uneven ground where no prior tracks existed, fresh terrain, untouched. We watched closely. For a second, nothing, just open ground ahead. Then he took another step, and it happened again. A footprint appeared ahead of him, not forming in real time, not gradually pressing into the dirt, just there, as if it had always been there. Placed exactly where his foot was about to land. He didn't stop. Neither did we. We followed, maintaining spacing as best we could while adjusting to the new direction. The formation loosened slightly, giving each of us a clearer view of the ground ahead. Every step, same result. The prints adjusted instantly to the new path. No delay, no error. I felt something shift in my perception. Before, it had felt like we were discovering something already in place. Now it felt like something was responding to us, watching, adapting. I changed my movement again, this time more aggressively. I angled left, breaking from the line, stepping over a patch of loose gravel that should have disrupted any clear impression. The ground ahead already had the print, same size, same tread. Even the depth matched the pressure I was about to apply. I slowed down, just slightly, not enough to be obvious, just enough to see if there was any lag. There wasn't. The footprint remained exactly where it needed to be. Waiting, I stepped into it. Perfect alignment. Behind me, I heard someone shift position, then another set of steps moving off pattern. We were all doing it now, testing, changing angles, altering stride length, adjusting pace. Each variation matched ahead of us without hesitation. At one point, one of the guys deliberately dragged his foot mid-step, creating an uneven motion. The next print reflected it. Same drag, same distortion in the dirt. That was the moment it stopped feeling like a phenomenon and started feeling like a presence. No one spoke. Not because we didn't want to, but because there wasn't anything useful to say. We were trained to identify patterns, to read terrain, to understand cause and effect. But this didn't follow any of those rules. I lifted my head, scanning the horizon again. Nothing, no movement, no visual confirmation of anything ahead, just open space. And yet, the ground continued to respond to us before we moved. That shouldn't be possible. Not physically, not logically, but it was happening, right in front of us. The point man slowed his pace, then stopped completely. We halted with him. He took a breath, then did something different. He stepped backward, not a full turn, just a controlled step in reverse. For a fraction of a second, there were no prints behind him. Then, one appeared, exactly where his foot was about to land. I felt a sharp drop in my stomach. That hadn't happened before. It wasn't just leading us anymore. It was adjusting in every direction, forward, sideways, now backward. There was no ahead anymore, no orientation, just prediction. I looked around at the others. No one looked confused now. No one looked uncertain. They looked focused, tense, like they had reached the same conclusion I had. We weren't tracking something. We were being tracked, not from behind, not from a distance, but from somewhere we couldn't see, somewhere close enough to know exactly what we were about to do. The point man turned his head slightly, just enough to speak without raising his voice. "Stay tight," he said. "Watch your spacing." We reformed, pulling back into a more controlled structure. Less experimentation, more containment. But the damage was already done. We had tested it, and it had answered. Every time, without hesitation, without error. As we started moving again, slower now, more deliberate, I found myself focusing less on the ground and more on the space just beyond it, the area where the prints appeared, because that's where it was, not visible, not defined, but present, close enough to anticipate us, close enough to stay just out of reach. And for the first time since we stepped off the original path, I had the distinct feeling that if we moved just a little faster, or just a little differently, we might finally see it. But something told me it would never let that happen. The radios didn't fail all at once. At first, it was subtle, easy to ignore, a brief crackle during a routine check, a slight delay before a response came through. Nothing unusual on its own. Comms aren't perfect, especially in remote terrain. Interference happens, but this felt inconsistent. We were still moving, slower now, tighter formation, less deviation. No one was testing the footprints anymore. That phase had passed. Now it was about maintaining control, understanding what we could, ignoring what we couldn't. Check comms, the point man said quietly. Standard procedure. I reached for my radio, pressing the transmit button. Alpha 1, comms check. A second passed, then 2, then a burst of static. Not loud, not sharp, just layered, like multiple signals overlapping but not aligning. I released the button, frowned slightly, then tried again. Alpha 1, comms check. This time, a response came through. Copy. Weak. Repeat. The voice was distorted, stretched thin across interference. I recognized it, but not clearly enough to place who it was. Signal's off, I said, keeping my voice level. Adjust frequency, came the reply from ahead. We did. Standard shift, clean transition. For a moment, everything cleared. Alpha 1, confirm position, I transmitted. Silence. Then, position, unclear. Say again. The words were there, but they didn't sit right, like they were being pulled apart before reaching us. Khan glanced over at me. You getting that? Yeah. He adjusted his own unit, tapping the side lightly. Try again. I did. Same result. Broken response. Partial words. Nothing complete. The point man halted us again, not abruptly this time, controlled, measured. Report, he said. Comms unstable, I replied. Signal's there, but it's not clean. Distance shouldn't be a factor, someone added from behind. He was right. We weren't far enough out for this kind of degradation. Terrain wasn't dense enough either. There was no clear reason for it. Switch to backup channel, the point man ordered. We complied. New frequency, fresh start. For a few seconds, it worked. Clear signal, no interference. Then a sound cut through. Not static. Not exactly, something else. It was faint, barely there, but it was structured, like a voice. I froze for a second, listening. There, the word was incomplete, distorted, but it had shape. Human. I looked up. You hear that? I asked. Khan didn't answer immediately. Then he nodded once. Yeah. Say again, the point man transmitted. Sharper now, no response. Just that same layered noise returning. But underneath it, something else. Faint, repeating. I couldn't make out the words, just the pattern, speech, trying to form. Then it cut out completely. Silence, the kind that feels heavier after sound disappears. Try command, someone said. I keyed the radio again. Command, this is Alpha 1. Comms check. Do you copy? Nothing. No static. No distortion. Just dead air. I tried again. Same result. We went through every protocol. Frequency shifts, signal boosts, repositioning. Nothing changed. It wasn't just interference. It was selective. Sometimes we got fragments, sometimes nothing at all. And when something did come through, it didn't feel like a clean transmission, more like something forcing its way through the channel. The point man lowered his radio slowly. Maintain internal comms, he said. No reliance on external. That meant we were cut off, completely. No command, no extraction support, just us, and whatever this was. We resumed movement shortly after. Tighter now, closer than before. No one liked it. But distance wasn't helping. I kept my radio close, listening even when I wasn't transmitting. Every so often, a faint burst would come through, not enough to understand, just enough to remind me it wasn't fully dead. At one point, I heard something clear, just one word. Ahead. I stopped walking for half a second. Did you just... I started. Keep moving, the point man said. Not turning. I didn't argue. But I knew what I heard. It wasn't from command. It wasn't from anyone in our unit. And it hadn't sounded distorted. It had sounded close. Too close. I glanced at the others. No one reacted. Either they didn't hear it, or they chose not to acknowledge it. We kept moving. No more testing. No more questions. Just controlled steps through a space that was getting harder to define. The footprints were still there, still matching, still waiting. And now, with the radios no longer reliable, there was nothing left between us and whatever was out there. Nothing to confirm what was real and what wasn't. I tightened my grip on the radio, listening for another sound, another word. But deep down, I wasn't sure I wanted to hear it again. Night didn't fall the way it normally does. There was no gradual fade, no smooth transition from light to dark. It felt quicker than it should have been, like the daylight was pulled away instead of setting naturally. One moment, we could still see the terrain clearly. The next, everything had flattened into shadow. We adjusted immediately. Night protocols, reduced spacing, controlled movement, eyes scanning constantly. Our gear compensated for the loss of light, but it didn't restore what had changed, because the darkness wasn't the problem. It was how everything felt inside it. The silence from earlier hadn't gone away. If anything, it had deepened. Even our own movement seemed quieter now, like the ground was absorbing more than just sound. Every step felt contained, controlled in a way that didn't match the terrain. We moved until the point man called a halt, not for long, just enough to reassess. We formed a loose perimeter, each of us taking a direction, scanning outward, standard procedure. Nothing unusual in the execution. But the environment didn't respond the way it should. No distant movement, no shifting shadows, nothing reacting to our presence. I swept my view slowly across the horizon, letting my eyes adjust to the darker contrast. Through the optics, the terrain was visible, but it felt shallow, like there was less depth than there should have been. Shapes existed, but they didn't feel grounded. I lowered the device slightly, listening instead. Still nothing. Not even the faint ambient noise you normally ignore. Just that same controlled absence. Then something shifted. I didn't hear it clearly. More like I noticed the idea of sound before the sound itself. A faint disturbance somewhere ahead. I turned slightly, focusing on the direction. Nothing visible. The moment I tried to lock onto it, it stopped. Completely. I held my position, waiting, listening. Nothing. I exhaled slowly, steadying my breathing. Probably nothing. That's what I told myself. Then I caught movement again, this time off to the right. Subtle, just outside direct focus. I turned faster, even still nothing. The space was empty, but the feeling wasn't. That was the part I couldn't ignore anymore. It wasn't just the environment, it was proximity, like something was close enough to be noticed, but not seen. I shifted my stance slightly, adjusting my angle, trying to catch any detail I might have missed. Behind me, I heard a quiet movement, someone else turning, then another. No one spoke. But we were all reacting to the same thing. Small, inconsistent disturbances, never sustained, never clear, always just at the edge. The point man moved slowly through the center of the formation, checking each position without breaking silence. When he reached me, he paused for half a second. "You seeing anything?" he asked quietly. "No," I replied. A beat. Something's there, I added. He didn't question it, just nodded once and moved on. That was enough. We held the perimeter a little longer, long enough for the tension to settle into something more stable, controlled, familiar in a way. Not because we understood it, but because we had accepted it. Then we broke formation and started moving again, slower now, more deliberate, every step placed with intention. The footprints were still there, faint under low light, but visible enough to follow, still matching, still leading. But now, there was something else, not ahead, not behind, around us. I felt it again as we moved, that same awareness, closer than before, not distant observation, proximity. At one point, I thought I heard breathing, not mine, not anyone in the unit, just a faint rhythm that didn't match our movement. I stopped for a fraction of a second, listened. It disappeared. I didn't mention it, because I wasn't sure, and uncertainty felt worse when spoken out loud. We kept going. The terrain hadn't changed. The formation hadn't changed, but everything else had. The silence, the darkness, the way the space around us felt occupied. And the longer we stayed in it, the harder it became to ignore the possibility that whatever had been ahead of us before wasn't ahead anymore. It had moved, closed the distance, and now it was keeping pace with us, just outside where we could see. We didn't plan to stop again that soon, but something about the way the ground looked ahead made the point man raise his hand without hesitation. We froze. No signal needed beyond that. I followed his line of sight down instead of forward. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. The terrain hadn't changed. Same dry surface, in same broken patches of dirt and gravel. Nothing unusual in the environment itself. Then it clicked. Footprints, not ahead of us, inside our position. I felt a slow tightening in my chest as I stepped slightly to the side, giving myself a clearer view. There were fresh impressions in the dirt, sharp, defined, exactly like before. But they weren't leading us anymore. They were placed between us, within the spacing of our formation. No one moved, no one spoke, because we all understood what that meant. No one had walked there. We would have seen it. We would have felt it. Our spacing had been consistent since the last movement. No crossing paths, no overlapping steps. And yet, the prints were there. Khan shifted slightly beside me, careful not to disturb the ground. His eyes moved slowly from one print to the next, tracking the pattern. They're inside, he said quietly. No one responded. They didn't need to. I crouched down again, bringing my focus closer. The impressions were identical to ours, same tread, same depth. But the positioning was wrong. They weren't aligned with any single path. They moved between us, like something had walked through the formation, calmly, deliberately, without being seen. I looked up instinctively, scanning the space around us. Nothing, no movement, no shape. Just darkness pressing in around the edges of visibility. The perimeter we had set earlier. It didn't mean anything now. Whatever this was, it hadn't crossed into it. It had already been there. A slow realization settled in. We hadn't secured the area. We had just stopped inside it. The point man stepped forward carefully, placing his boot just outside one of the impressions. "Hold positions," he said. His voice was steady, but quieter than before, more controlled, like he was measuring every word. I shifted my weight slightly, trying to maintain balance without stepping into any of the prints. It felt wrong to disturb them, not because of protocol, but because of what they represented, evidence, not of movement, of presence. I counted them quickly. 1, 2, 3, more than that, spread across the space we occupied. Not random, not scattered, placed, intentional. I looked at the nearest one again. The depth matched a full step, not partial, not forming, complete, like it had been made in a single moment. I tried to picture it happening, something moving through us, between us, close enough to leave a physical impression, but not close enough to be seen. My mind rejected it immediately. There was no version of that scenario that made sense. And yet, the ground said otherwise. Behind me, someone shifted too quickly, a boot scraping lightly against gravel. Every head turned, not toward the sound, but toward the space just beyond it, like we were expecting something to react. Nothing did. The silence held, but it felt different now, not empty, occupied. I became aware of my own position in the formation, how exposed it felt, not because of distance, but because of uncertainty. We couldn't see it, we couldn't hear it clearly, but it had already moved through us. That changed everything. The point man straightened slightly, eyes scanning slowly across each of us. "Stay tight," he said. No one argued. We closed the spacing, not enough to lose movement, just enough to feel less alone in it, even though it didn't help, because whatever had done this had no issue being within that space already. I took one last look at the prints before we moved again, tried to find something in them that didn't match, something that proved it wasn't exactly what it looked like. There was nothing. Perfect replication, perfect placement. Then we stepped forward, carefully, deliberately, and as we moved, I avoided looking down, because I didn't want to see it happen again, didn't want to watch new prints appear where no one had stepped, didn't want to confirm what we were all starting to understand, that the distance we thought we had was gone, and whatever had been staying ahead of us before was now close enough to stand among us without being noticed until it chose to be. It wasn't obvious at first. Nothing changed suddenly. No clear moment where things shifted. It came in slowly, the same way everything else had. Quiet, controlled, almost unnoticeable unless you were paying attention. I checked my watch out of habit. We'd been moving for what felt like maybe 15 minutes since the last halt. The display said 42. I stared at it longer than I should have, not because I thought it was broken, but because it didn't match anything I felt. I lowered my arm, kept moving, didn't say anything. Time perception slips sometimes. Fatigue, stress, low visibility. It all affects how you process duration. That's normal. But this didn't feel like that. It felt misaligned. I glanced over at Khan. "Time?" I asked quietly. He checked his watch without breaking stride. 31. I stopped walking, just for a second. "Say again." He looked at me this time. 31. I raised my wrist again. 43. Neither of us said anything. We didn't need to. That shouldn't happen. Not with synced watches. Not with standard issue. They don't drift like that. Not this fast. Not this far. "Check time," the point man said, voice low but firm. One by one, numbers came back. 32. 35. 41. None of them matched, not even close. A silence followed. Not the environmental silence. A different kind. The kind that comes when something stops making sense. "Reset," the point man ordered. We did. All watches synced to his. 43. Clean, controlled, back to structure. We moved again. For a while, it felt normal. Steps consistent. Spacing maintained. The kind of rhythm you rely on when everything else feels uncertain. Then I checked again. 38. I felt a slow drop in my chest. I hadn't stopped moving. I hadn't done anything that would explain losing time, or gaining it. I didn't even know which it was anymore. "Khan," I said quietly. He was already looking at me. "Same?" I asked. He nodded once. "Off again." We didn't call it out immediately. Instead, I tried something else. I focused on counting steps. Basic method. Ground yourself in something measurable. 1, 2, 3. Steady pace, consistent breathing. At around 50 steps, I looked up. The terrain ahead looked familiar. Too familiar. I slowed slightly, scanning the area. The same shallow dip. The same broken patch of gravel to the right. We had passed this. I was sure of it. "Hold," I said. The word came out before I thought about it. The formation stopped. "Why?" the point man asked. I pointed ahead. "We've been here." He didn't respond right away, just looked, then walked forward a few steps, examining the ground. The footprints were there, ours, but they didn't look old, edges still defined, no sign of disturbance, like they had just been made. He turned back slowly. "No," he said, but there was hesitation in it, not doubt, recognition. "We passed this," I repeated. Khan stepped forward beside him, crouching slightly. He traced one of the prints with his eyes, not touching it, then stood. "Same pattern," he said. That didn't help. That made it worse. Because if the terrain matched, and the prints matched, then either we had looped back without realizing it, or the environment wasn't fixed. I checked my watch again. 49, no, 50. The seconds ticked forward normally, nothing wrong with the movement, just the time itself. "Keep moving," the point man said finally. We did, but the confidence was gone. Each step felt uncertain, not because of the ground, but because we didn't know if we were actually progressing or just repeating. The silence pressed in tighter now, not empty, not distant, close, like it was surrounding us from every direction. I tried to focus on the horizon again, pick a point, track movement against it, but even that felt unreliable. The shapes didn't hold the way they should. Distance felt inconsistent, like the space between things wasn't stable. At one point, I looked back. Our trail should have been visible, clear line of movement, but it wasn't. The ground behind us looked reset. No prints, no disturbance, just untouched terrain. I stopped breathing for a second. That wasn't possible. We had just walked through it, minutes ago, or what felt like minutes. "Khan," I said. He turned. I gestured behind us. He looked, then looked back at me. No words, just the same realization. We were moving, but we weren't leaving anything behind. No trail, no proof, just the present moment, and the footprints that kept appearing ahead. I checked my watch one more time. It read 42 again. The same number as before. Like nothing had changed. Like nothing had passed. I lowered my arm slowly. And for the first time since this started, I wasn't sure if we were moving forward at all, or if we were just being kept in place, while something around us decided how time should work. The moment it changed, none of us reacted right away. Not because we didn't notice, but because it took a second to understand what we were actually seeing. We were already on edge. Time wasn't holding steady. The terrain wasn't reliable, and the silence had settled into something that felt almost intentional. But this was different. I saw it happen with the point man. He slowed slightly, adjusting his footing before stepping over a shallow dip in the ground. It was a natural movement, controlled, predictable, and before his boot even left the ground, the footprint ahead of him was already there, not forming, not appearing gradually. It was just present, exactly where his foot was about to land. He didn't stop, but I did, just for a fraction of a second, because this wasn't like before. Before, it felt like something was staying ahead of us, matching our path. Now, there was no gap, no distance. It wasn't ahead of us anymore. It was moving with us, step for step, before we even committed to the movement. I looked down at my own next step, paused, hovered just above the ground. The footprint was already there, same shape, same depth, perfectly aligned with the angle I was about to take. I didn't move. I held my foot in place, suspended for a moment longer than felt natural. The print didn't change, didn't adjust. It had already matched. I slowly lowered my boot into it. Perfect fit, no resistance, no variation. I felt something tighten in my chest, not panic, something colder, something more controlled. I looked around. Others had noticed. You could see it in the way they moved now, slower, more deliberate, like each step was being questioned before it happened. "Hold," the point man said. We stopped immediately. No one moved. No one even shifted weight. The ground ahead was covered in those prints. Not just a path anymore. A pattern. Continuous. Unbroken. Like something had already walked every possible step we could take. The point man looked down, then took a small step forward, carefully, deliberately. The next print was already waiting. He exhaled slowly, then did something we hadn't tried yet. He moved unpredictably, a quick step to the left, then forward, then a slight turn. Each movement matched instantly. No delay, no correction, like it wasn't reacting, like it already knew. "That's not tracking," someone said quietly. No one responded, because we all understood what he meant. Tracking implies following, delay, adjustment. This wasn't that. This was anticipation. I felt it settle in, not as a thought, as a certainty. Whatever was doing this wasn't watching what we did. It was knowing what we were going to do before we did it. I tested it again, this time faster. I stepped forward without hesitation. The print was already there. Then I stopped abruptly. The next one, still waiting, exactly where my foot would have landed if I hadn't stopped. I stepped to the side instead. Another print, perfectly placed, waiting, no matter what I did. The ground ahead was already prepared for it. I felt a shift in my awareness, not outward, inward, like my own movement wasn't entirely mine anymore, like something else had already decided it, and I was just following through. I clenched my jaw slightly, forcing myself to stay grounded, focus on control, on choice. But even that felt uncertain now, because every choice I made was already reflected in the ground before I made it. The silence pressed in tighter, not empty, watching, close. I could feel it now, not around us, not ahead, yet right at the edge of where our movement began, like something was standing just beyond perception, setting the path before we walked it. The point man straightened slightly. "Keep moving," he said. His voice was steady, but lower than before. We obeyed, because standing still didn't change anything. Moving didn't change anything either. But at least movement gave us direction, even if it wasn't ours. As we stepped forward again, I stopped looking at the prints, because I already knew what I'd see. Instead, I focused on the space just beyond them, the place where they appeared, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw something. Not clearly, not fully, just a distortion, a shape that didn't hold, standing exactly where the next step would be. Then it was gone, like it had never been there. I didn't say anything, because I wasn't sure, and I didn't want to confirm it, not yet. But the thought stayed with me, that maybe, just maybe, we weren't walking into empty space. We were stepping into positions that had already been occupied, a fraction of a second before we got there. And whatever was there was making sure we never saw it clearly. Only the traces it left behind, before we even arrived. It didn't happen all at once. No one snapped. No one panicked. It was quieter than that, slower. But you could feel it building. Up to that point, we had held formation no matter what. Adjusted, tightened, adapted, but never broken. That's what keeps things controlled. That's what keeps things real. But control depends on understanding, and we didn't have that anymore. We were still moving, still following a direction that didn't feel like ours. The footprints continued ahead, already placed, already waiting. Every step confirmed the same thing over and over again. We weren't choosing where to go. We were stepping into something that had already been decided. I tried to ignore it, focused on breathing, on spacing, on the rhythm of movement. But the more I tried to ground myself, the more something else pushed back. A thought, quiet at first, then louder. What if the next step isn't yours? I forced it out, kept moving. Then it happened. One of the men, Rafik, broke formation. Not suddenly, not erratically. He just stepped out, a slight shift to the right at first, like he was adjusting position, then another step, and another, until he was no longer aligned with us. "Hold position," the point man said immediately. Rafik didn't respond. He kept moving, not fast, not panicked, just deliberate, like he was testing something we hadn't. "Rafik," I called. No reaction. He stopped a few meters away, looking down at the ground in front of him. Then he did something none of us had tried like that. He moved unpredictably, fast. A sharp step forward, then sideways, then back again, breaking any pattern, destroying rhythm. For a second, nothing happened. No prints ahead, no immediate match. I felt a flicker of something, relief. Then they appeared, all at once, not one by one, a full set of footprints ahead of him, already aligned with every movement he was about to make, perfectly placed, every direction, every shift, like the ground had already mapped out his actions before he performed them. Rafik froze, completely still. I saw it in his posture, that moment where something clicks, where doubt turns into understanding, and understanding turns into something worse. "That's not right," he said quietly. No one answered, because we were all looking at the same thing. "Get back in line," the point man ordered. Firm, controlled. Rafik didn't move. His head tilted slightly, still focused on the prints. "They're not reacting," he said. "They're waiting." There was something in his voice now, not fear, recognition, the kind that settles too deep, too fast. "Rafik," I said, sharper this time. He finally looked up, but not at me, past me, like he was trying to see something just beyond where I stood. "You don't feel that?" he asked. I didn't answer, because I did, but I didn't want to give it shape. He took a slow step backward. The print appeared instantly behind him, waiting. He looked down at it, then back up again. "They know where we're going," he said. No hesitation now, no uncertainty. "They know before we do." The silence tightened around us, the kind that feels like pressure. "Back in formation," the point man repeated. Rafik hesitated, then slowly stepped forward, back toward us, each step already marked, already decided. When he rejoined the line, the spacing closed again, tighter than before. No one wanted distance anymore, not after that. We resumed movement, but something had changed. Not in the environment, in us. Before, we were trying to understand it. Now, we were trying not to think about it, because once you accept that your movement isn't entirely yours, that your choices are already known, it does something to you. It takes away control, and without control, formation doesn't mean much. Discipline doesn't mean much. You're just following. I kept my eyes forward, avoided looking down, but I could still feel it. Every step, every placement, already waiting. And the worst part wasn't that something was predicting us. It was that it felt close. Close enough to do it. Close enough to stay just out of sight, while knowing exactly what we were about to do next. We didn't break formation again after that, but it didn't matter, because whatever line we thought we were holding had already been crossed, long before we realized it. No one said anything after that, not for a while. We moved the way we were trained to, tight formation, controlled pace, eyes forward, but the structure felt thinner now, like it was holding shape out of habit, not confidence. Rafiq stayed quiet. He didn't drift again, didn't test anything, but something about him had changed. You could see it in how he held himself, more rigid, more focused, like he was trying to ignore something that hadn't left him. I understood that, because I felt it too, the proximity. It wasn't just a thought anymore, not just a possibility. It felt close. We kept moving through the same terrain, but it didn't feel like distance was changing. The ground looked different, but the space around us felt constant, like we were inside something instead of moving through it. That's when it happened. Subtle at first. I saw it in my peripheral vision, just a shift, a break in the consistency of the darkness. I turned my head immediately. Nothing, just empty space where something should have been. I slowed slightly, scanning the area more carefully. Still nothing, but I knew I hadn't imagined it. "Did you see that?" I asked quietly. No one answered right away. Then Khan spoke. "Where?" "Left side, just past the ridge line." He adjusted his angle, looking in that direction, held it, then shook his head. "Nothing." I nodded, didn't argue, but I kept watching that area longer than I should have, because something about it didn't feel empty. We continued. A few more steps, then I saw it again, this time clearer, not a full shape, not something you could define, just absence, like a section of the dark was deeper than everything around it. Standing upright, at a distance that didn't feel far enough. I stopped, not intentionally, my body just did it. Everything narrowed to that point. I stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It didn't move, didn't shift, just stayed there, unclear, unstable. Then it was gone, not fading, not stepping away, just gone, like it had never been there. Contact?" the point man asked immediately. "No," I said. My voice came out steady, but it didn't feel steady. "I don't know." That was the most accurate answer I had. We held position for a moment, everyone scanning, looking for something that wouldn't show itself. Nothing appeared, no sound, no movement, just that same controlled silence. "Keep moving," he said. We did, but slower now, more deliberate than before. And I couldn't shake it, the image, if you could even call it that. It hadn't looked solid, hadn't looked like anything I could describe, but it had been there. and it had been positioned exactly where the next set of footprints would appear. That's what stayed with me. Not what it looked like, where it was. I started watching the ground again, not the prints, the space just before them, the place where they formed. And every time I focused on it, I felt that same pressure, like something was just outside visibility, occupying that exact position, then stepping away, just before we arrived. Rafiq spoke suddenly, low, almost under his breath. I saw it too. I looked at him. He wasn't looking at me. His eyes were fixed ahead. "It's not staying still," he said. "It's adjusting." No one asked him to explain. No one wanted him to, because we were all starting to understand it in our own way. That whatever this was, it wasn't just predicting movement. It was aligning with it, positioning itself exactly where we were about to be, then leaving, just before we got there. I felt that cold tightening again, stronger this time. Because that meant one thing. It wasn't ahead of us. It wasn't behind us. It was intersecting with us. Every step, every position, on just out of reach. I kept my eyes forward after that, didn't try to see it again, because the moment I did, I wasn't sure what would happen if it didn't disappear. And something told me it was getting closer to the point where it wouldn't. The decision to pull out wasn't debated. It just happened. No formal call, no extended discussion. The point man slowed, looked ahead for a second longer than usual, then gave a single command. "We're done. We're heading back." No one questioned it. By then, the objective didn't matter anymore. We weren't gathering anything useful. We weren't mapping anything reliable. And whatever we were dealing with, it wasn't something we could report in a way that would make sense. We turned. Or at least, we thought we did. That's when things stopped lining up completely. The terrain behind us should have been familiar, even in low light, even with everything that had already happened. There should have been some recognition, landmarks, elevation, direction, something to anchor movement. There was nothing. It looked like new ground, same type of terrain, same general layout, but not the same. I checked my bearings. The compass was stable, direction was correct, but the environment didn't match it. "Keep moving," the point man said. We did, but slower, because every step forward felt uncertain. The footprints were still there, of course they were, now leading in the direction we intended to go, back the way we came, except they weren't retracing anything. They were new, fresh, already placed, guiding us. That was the first moment it felt intentional in a different way. Before, it had been matching us. Now, it was leading us. I felt that shift immediately, not just in thought, in instinct, like we weren't choosing the way out, we were being given one. "Khan," I said quietly, "you seeing this?" "Yeah," he replied, no hesitation. "They're not ours." I nodded. We both knew that already, but saying it confirmed something else. We weren't leaving a trail. We weren't following one. We were moving along something preset, something that had already decided our exit. The formation tightened without command. No one wanted distance anymore, not after everything we'd seen. We kept moving, 5 minutes, 10. Time didn't matter anymore. Distance didn't either, because nothing changed. The terrain stayed consistent, too consistent, like it was repeating small variations of itself instead of progressing. I started watching for markers, anything distinct, a rock formation, a break in elevation, a shift in vegetation, something to prove we were actually moving. Nothing held. Everything felt familiar, but not in a way that meant we'd been there before. more like it had been designed to feel that way. "Stop," the point man said suddenly. We halted. He pointed ahead. There was a shallow dip in the ground, slight elevation on the far side, loose gravel to the right. I felt a cold weight settle in my chest. "We've seen this," I said. No one argued, because we all recognized it. Not clearly, but enough. The same structure, the same layout. We moved forward cautiously, step by step. And as we crossed into that area, the footprints ahead didn't change, didn't pause, didn't hesitate. They continued, like this was still the correct path, even though we had already walked it, or something identical to it. "This doesn't make sense," someone said quietly. No one responded. Because we were past that, past trying to make sense of it. We moved again, faster this time, not running, but pushing pace, trying to break whatever pattern we were caught in. The footprints adjusted. Of course they did. Still ahead, still waiting, still guiding. Then it stopped, abruptly. The prints ended. No fade, no transition. Just gone. The ground ahead was empty. Normal. For the first time in hours, nothing was there. We slowed immediately. No one stepped forward right away, because the absence felt just as wrong as everything else. "Move," the point man said. We did, carefully, crossing the point where the prints had ended. And the moment we did, everything changed. The air felt lighter. The silence shifted. Not gone, but different. Less controlled. I looked around. The terrain finally looked normal. Not familiar, but stable, consistent, real. I turned back instinctively. The path behind us was visible, clear, disturbed ground. Our footprints, actual ones. Not the ones we had been following. The ones we had made. I stared at them for a second longer than I should have. Then looked forward again. Nothing ahead, no prints, no distortion, no presence I could feel. We didn't stop, didn't question it. We just kept moving, and within minutes, we were out, just like that. No transition, no clear boundary. One moment, we were inside it. The next, we weren't. No one spoke for a long time after that, because none of us understood what had just happened. Not how we got out, not why it stopped, not what it was. All we knew was that it had let us leave, and that didn't feel like the same thing as escaping. We didn't talk about it on the way back, not because we were ordered not to, but because there wasn't anything to say that would make it clearer. The moment we stepped out of that area, everything snapped back into place. The air felt normal, sound returned, even the weight of our gear felt more familiar. Like something had been subtly off before, and we hadn't fully noticed until it corrected itself. But none of us relaxed. We kept moving in silence, maintaining formation out of habit more than necessity. The terrain behaved the way it should now. Footsteps sounded right, distance felt consistent. When I looked back, our trail stayed visible. It held. That should have been enough. It wasn't. Because even though the environment had changed, something else hadn't. I felt it first in the quiet moments between steps. Not around me, not in front, just there. Close enough to notice if I focused on it too long. I didn't mention it, neither did anyone else, but I could see it in the others. Small things. The way Khan checked behind us more often than necessary. The way Rafik kept his eyes forward but never fully settled. Even the point man, his posture stayed tighter than usual, like he was still accounting for something we couldn't see anymore. We reached the extraction point without incident. No delays, no interference. Comms came back the moment we cleared the area. Clean signal. Immediate response. Command acknowledged us like nothing had happened. That was the first disconnect. "Report status," they asked. The point man paused, just for a second, then gave the standard response. "Patrol complete. No contact." That was it. No mention of the footprints. No mention of the comms failure. No mention of anything we had just experienced. And no one corrected him. Because there was no way to explain it that wouldn't sound wrong. Or worse, impossible. We returned to base, filed the report, went through debrief, same questions, same structure, terrain conditions, movement timeline, any signs of activity. We answered carefully, accurately, but not completely. Certain details were left out. Not intentionally, just naturally. Because when you tried to put them into words, they didn't hold. They didn't fit inside the framework of a normal report. So they stayed with us instead, individually, quietly. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was thinking about it directly, but because every time I started to drift, I felt that same awareness again. Not a sound, not movement, just a presence, close, watching. I opened my eyes more than once, expecting to see something. There was nothing, just the familiar interior of the barracks. Still, normal. But the feeling didn't go away immediately. It lingered, faded slowly, like something stepping back instead of disappearing. Over the next few days, things returned to routine. Training, briefings, standard operations. Everything looked the same, felt the same. But small details started to surface. Khan mentioned his watch had reset itself twice overnight. Rafiq said he kept hearing faint static from his radio, even when it was powered off. I didn't say anything at first. Then one morning during a routine check, I noticed something. My boots, the wear pattern on the sole, the outer edge, slightly worn down, same as before. But there was something else, a second mark, fainter, offset, like another pattern had been pressed into it. Not from use, not from terrain, just there. I stared at it longer than I should have. Then put the boot on anyway. Didn't report it. Didn't ask about it, because I already knew what it meant, or at least what it suggested. We had left that place, physically. There was no doubt about that. But whatever had been there, whatever had been placing those footprints, it hadn't needed to follow us. It didn't need distance. It didn't need time, because it already knew where we were going. Before we did. That was the part I couldn't shake. Not the footprints themselves, not the silence, not even the shape I thought I saw. It was the timing, in the way everything happened just before we acted. Like our movement wasn't leading anything. It was being matched in advance. Even now, sometimes when I'm walking alone, I catch myself hesitating before taking a step. Not because I'm unsure, but because there's a moment just before my foot hits the ground where I feel like I'm stepping into something that's already been placed there, waiting, perfectly aligned, and I don't look down anymore because I'm not sure what I'd see if I did, and I'm not sure I want to confirm that it never really stopped, that whatever was out there isn't following. It's still just ahead, exactly where I'm about to be before I even decide to move.